Welcome to the fourth module. This week's theme will be privacy and surveillance. Privacy is becoming more and more relevant, and people have been discussing and bringing up this topic more and more in their everyday lives because we have gradually get to realize that privacy is not only about targeting individuals, just choosing and picking someone and then following where they are and what they do in an individual basis, because now we are living in the age of big data, living in the age of artificial intelligence. So privacy is not only about somebody tracking you, but massive amounts of surveillance and processing of user data that is collected by millions and millions of interactions. Everything we do on social media turns into data. So privacy becomes a much more relevant but also a complicated issue. So today I want to show you some examples in the light of the theoretical concepts. Maybe a primitive question, but a very important question to begin with, would be about privacy and why it matters. Why is it that makes our private lives so precious, so valuable, that we want full control over them? Why do we get annoyed when someone leaks some sort of information about us, about our lives? Well, this question actually requires a few other questions about what it is that we call privacy. And especially in the age of social media, online media, why is it so important that we take care of our privacy? Well, Christian Fuchs, in his article or book chapter about a critical perspective to privacy, raises these three issues in relationship to this main question. When we talk about our privacy on social media, we need to understand data and why data represents us. So, Fuchs asks these questions. How is the information about you processed? Who has access to this type of personal data? And how shall this access be regulated? The image that you see behind the text is a newspaper ad, an actual physical newspaper ad that Facebook had to release in a way after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. The scandal that we had talked about a couple of weeks ago, where millions and millions of Facebook users' personal data and the data of their friends have been collected, shared with some third parties without their consent, and then, allegedly at least, used to influence their political decisions. It says, we have a responsibility to protect your information. If we can't, we don't deserve it. Well, on a side note, one has to say that privacy hasn't always been this way. As Jürgen Habermas stresses, that the modern concept of privacy is connected to capitalism and the separation of private and public. This hasn't been always the same, and it's not the same in each culture. This rise of the idea of privacy in the society, as according to Habermas and Fuchs, is connected to the rise of the ideal of private ownership. This image you see, for example, is an illustration of an old Roman toilet. In the ancient times, a lot of the different private activities, as we call them today, would be actually social and public. So the understanding and the social meaning of privacy depends on the culture in which we talk about privacy. Naturally, many factors, including media, technology, economy, politics, lifestyle, influences this. And these days, when we talk about privacy, online privacy or digital privacy, of course, we have to talk about how we control it. In a way, how we have a right to appropriate the flow of information within different apps, to different networks, to different people. And why is it important? Again, we have to think in a social context when and how privacy can be used to negatively affect one individual, a group, maybe a vulnerable group in society, or a single person. One example that I have about this issue, the control of information about you, is from Denmark. In 2018, there was a case, a scandal in a way, where some people called a child pornography scandal, but it was sort of a different case, because this was a case of two high school students having sex with each other while someone else probably was recording this, and then this recording was shared through private messaging from friend to friend in the school's network, and then to some other youngsters through friendships and networks and things like that. It didn't really get public. It wasn't uploaded to a porn site that, like we see in a revenge porn case, for instance. This was completely individual and in small groups, a private way of spreading this illegal and unethical video. But in the end, Danish police actually called about 1,100 young people into questioning, and more than 800, almost 900 of these people were below 18 years of age, and most of them, according to Politiken, has said that they didn't even know the consequences of what they have done. This was just a joke for them. This example shows us how important it is to care about how personal information, sensitive information spreads on the internet, but also about our lack of ability, our lack of response to these kinds of events. At least for now, we don't really know how to deal with this kind of spread. Another example from Denmark, this young girl, the Danish journalist Emma Holten, created a campaign which was mainly about herself, because her pictures, her naked pictures, were stolen and then shared. So she became viral without her consent. Individuals, groups, or institutions to determine when, how, and to what extent information about them is communicated to others. In this case, we will see that this young girl actually came up with a new way of dealing with this problem. The fact that she lost control of her personal information led her to say, let's create a new type of chain, a new type of spread where I am in control. So as we have seen in the video, consent is one of the key issues about privacy on the internet. The article talks about three types of theories, three types of models through which we can understand where we stand in terms of what privacy means to us and what kind of control over our privacy we have. So on the one end of the scale, there's the restricted access theory, the right to be left alone. It's the gatekeeping. It's us controlling who we allow to enter in our social lives and who we want to keep out. In a way, it would be like an Instagram page with a filter. And on the other end of this scala, there is the control theory. Individuals' ability and right to determine when, how, and to what extent information about them is communicated to others. So what's in between where we are now, to me at least, the idea that makes more sense now is some sort of a combination between these two. Still, we are the gatekeepers, we still restrict access to our social lives, but full control is not realistic and not meaningful in the media environment that we're in. So we're talking about some limited type of control that is managed by a system, a platform, for instance, and our way of choosing and limiting and filtering our privacy through the limited controls that are given to us through these platforms. Now think about your Snapchat versus your Facebook, for instance. And naturally, to be able to use these platforms, we have to give them quite a lot of permissions about our location, about our usage behavior, about the content we share, about our birthday, our likes and dislikes, our consumption habits, our taste in music, film, our political ideals, what have you. But these permissions, they're not always necessarily given voluntarily. There are also some digital platforms that we have to use or we are somehow assigned because our part of our lives depends on them. This example I have is called Aula, which is now the overarching educational platform, the official platform for all schools and students and teachers and parents for Denmark. Everyone, including myself in near future, because my child will be starting school, every parent and child and school has to have a profile in this system. This is also a platform where massive amounts of data from the beginning of the first grade in school to the end of high school will be collected about every child in Denmark. This may sound like a good idea. In many ways, it is. More than 2 million regular users will be using this platform. About 4,200 schools, daycare services will be using in their everyday lives. This would include the food kids eat, the games they play, the classes they missed, their illnesses, and all sorts of issues that relate to their education. So why is this a problem? Well, the idea was that the Danish state had a partnership with Amazon to store this huge amount of information in the servers of Amazon. Amazon obviously is a private company, which to a certain extent could be okay because of these agreements that they have. But then Amazon said that they're going to move these servers to a different location, a cheaper probably location that is not in Denmark. The data will still be encrypted. Nobody other than Denmark would have access to this data, but physically the servers will be moved to an undisclosed location. It is undisclosed because of privacy reasons too. And this naturally worried some of the parents because they didn't want this data to be transferred to another country that's bound to different types of laws, and they didn't really have the control and security over the data that they would trust the Danish government to have. As a result of this, Aula published another statement, and they said, It does not matter if this data is in Farum in Denmark or in Frankfurt, Germany. The only difference is that the data cable is longer and that there are data lines that are encrypted and close to the outside world. If there were to be some people out there with shady intentions, we would be to help them by telling where the data is. Well, all in all, the system is being used right now. I seriously have no idea where the data is or the servers are. So how about surveillance? Not every types of data collection naturally can be counted as surveillance. According to Fuchs, surveillance is a specific type of information gathering, storage, processing, assessment, and use of this information in order to control, manipulate, or dominate the existing power relationship. One example from Denmark from 2016 would be a new law that has passed about the return of mass online surveillance. According to this law, internet service providers will be required to register every online communication. The data should provide a detailed oversight of which websites, services, and servers that they contact with. The police will not be able to find out the content of your communications, just who communicated with whom, when, and where. So what could be the consequences of such widespread surveillance? It's not always necessarily a bad thing. It's also about security. It's also about anti-terror. It's also about making sure that people are safe in the country. But what is the limit and what is the extent to which we allow governments or companies to process our information for these reasons? There are several reasons why this might be relevant and necessary. As we are all aware, we're going through some weird times. In these chaotic times, all countries all around the world, we are trying to come up with methods to keep the contagion limited and framed to smaller areas. We want to stop people from walking around and infecting each other. Well, in this case with Corona, we are seeing that there are some applications or some forms of data gathering that's used to stop the spreading of the disease. Just like the US that is reportedly gathering data from ad services, the advertising industry, to gain access to people's geolocations, to see if people tend to gather together in certain parts of the city, for instance. In Taiwan, it's more invasive in that sense. They use something they call an electronic fence. It tracks mobile phones data, the location, and then if you happen to leave home, it immediately alerts authorities. South Korea has also gone a step further. They're tracking individuals' phones and creating a map and public map for other citizens to see if they're actually close to coronavirus patients. This data is not only about geolocation, it's also your credit card records and all sorts of different types of knowledge that they can use to track people and make sure that they have a distance. In Singapore, they have asked people to download an app. In Iran, the same. They ask people to use an app that shows whether you're a patient, that shows other people that you're nearby, or if you're not a patient, that shows some patients might be nearby. In Poland, they ask people to take selfies and send it to the police to make sure that they are in the quarantine and they're not leaving. There are several other types of invasive procedures that may make sense right now, but the question, of course, will be, will we keep these procedures when the crisis is over? So coming back to Facebook, this image is from Mark Zuckerberg's one of the recent speeches where he decided to declare the future vision of Facebook, where, as written down, its future is private. By private, he of course means encoding, encryption, more limited environments for communicating with people you know, and being able to control and filter your information and your permissions. This was different when Christian Fuchs wrote his book in 2013-14. Facebook's privacy algorithm has been changing several times during that time, but there are some important aspects that haven't changed because Facebook business model is still based on targeted advertising. According to Fuchs, surveillance on Facebook is not just surveillance of users of a platform. It's not just clicks and likes. It is also about people creating and sharing content, browsing other people's profiles and other people's data, interacting with each other, joining, creating, building communities, and co-creating things together. So it's a massive amounts of data that is not only statistical, but relational and emotional and social. We have seen this map before. It's an illustration of how Facebook's personal networks can be seen. through different types of influencers in the network and different connections. Well, targeted advertising also pays attention to these maps because it is the way in which messages virally spread. We have talked about the Cambridge Analytica scandal. It is a question whether it is surveillance or some sort of data breach. It is, of course, an important question to ask. But one thing is for sure about Cambridge Analytica, that all of us, or millions of Facebook users, have voluntarily, but without knowing the consequences, without knowing the terms and conditions of their consent, have provided this company with very valuable data that in the end could actually have a significant impact on our politics. Right after the crisis, Mark Zuckerberg went on TV several times. This interview is from CNN.
I want to start with just a basic question, Mark. What happened? What went wrong?
So this was a major breach of trust, and I'm really sorry that this happened. We have a basic responsibility to protect people's data, and if we can't do that, then we don't deserve to have the opportunity to serve people. So our responsibility now is to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And there are a few basic things that I think we need to do to ensure that. One is making sure that developers like Alexander Kogan, who got access to a lot of information and then improperly used it, just don't get access to as much information going forward. The other is we need to make sure that there aren't any other Cambridge Analyticas out there.
It was also known by several scholars, professional practitioners, and some users that this type of data gathering and processing by Facebook back then was never a secret thing. It was never really a glitch. It was never really some sort of a hacking thing, but it was the main business model of Facebook. This data was actually available to anyone who wants to use that. This is how I was able to come up with maps like this. You may have seen or heard about Mark Zuckerberg testifying in the US Congress, where the Congress members have asked them, are you selling people's data? And Mark Zuckerberg himself was very confidently saying, no, sir, we are not selling people's data. And that actually was true. What they're doing is not selling data, but it is the information they keep to themselves. What they sell is the connection that advertising companies want to reach the right audience, to know who you are, what you're interested in, and then finding you and people like you in your network to push their ads to. This official Facebook video explains the Facebook's business model quite well.
In this short video, you'll learn how Facebook ads can help your business reach the right people. Facebook is different than other ways of advertising because we can get your ads to just the right people. More than 1 billion people around the world use Facebook. And everyone sees Newsfeed, a stream of information from their friends, family, and things they're interested in, like movies and music, sports and activities, and businesses too. With so many people on Facebook, we can connect your business to the right people right when they're open to discovering. Here's how your ads can reach the right people. When you create an ad, you can pick the type of people you want to reach by choosing certain traits, so you can find the people who are most likely to be interested in your business. Choose from options like age, gender, location, and their interests, like biking, cooking, or gadgets, and so much more. You can even reach people by the specific device they use to check Facebook, like computers, phones, and tablets. And using partner categories, we can help you understand what people like to do off Facebook too, like if they want to buy a car or shop for premium pet food. Your audience can be narrow or broad. It's all about who you want to reach. When your ad runs, only the people with the traits you picked will see it. This makes Facebook a really efficient way to reach new customers and grow your business.
More or less all of us in this class have been Facebook users for some time, but we have never paid for this. But there are people or companies who are paying Facebook. These are the end users of Facebook. These are the ones who Facebook works to satisfy. They are the paying customers, and we are the product, according to Rushkoff. Christian Fuchs' article also talks about the power of likes and why liking on Facebook is one of the main drivers behind this system, why it's an ideological tool, why it gives away so much about ourselves. Naturally, when the book was written in 2013, there was not more than liking, but still the single like could provide massive amounts of data to Facebook to label and tag individuals and for advertisers to reach them through the right type of channels. Now imagine the type of reactions we have on each type of content on Facebook and what kind of data it provides to Facebook about what makes us sad, what makes us angry, what makes us laugh or emotional. And the power of likes shows itself when one wants to go inside Facebook's ad preferences and check out what Facebook knows about you. But then this list is what Facebook provides with the advertisers, with third-party companies and their partners to reach the right type of audience and the right type of consumers. And when you look at the world map of social networks by 2018, this shows us how widespread Facebook itself is around the world. It also shows us how different types of people and communities and cultures and groups have been using Facebook for different reasons. So what we have experienced in our everyday lives with our families, our friends, our networks may not represent the whole world. Why is this relevant? It is relevant because it shows us results from all around the world, results that we were not anticipated when we started using Facebook, such as the case of ethnic cleansing in Myanmar, fueled by hate speech and fake news that was mainly tracked into certain sources who spread these. There were fake images that were being spread about people burning their homes, and many of these images have been debunked, but they still stand. And in this case, the inability of Facebook to regulate the spread of these messages, these promoted hate speech and fake news ads, would lead to catastrophic results. We have also seen examples of targeted advertising and misinformation and fake speech and propaganda in the case of Brexit, where there were several shady organizations paying good money to social media platforms to spread these doctored images, these fake news. For instance, about Turkey joining the EU, that was widely spread in the UK before the Brexit to scare people off, because there would be 76 million people coming into EU and using the social welfare state's benefits. This was obviously not the case. Being Turkish myself, I always knew that Turkey wasn't joining the EU at that time. Later on, it was also released that this organization called Vote Leave was found guilty for breaking the electoral law, but we know that they had used about £7 million for the misinformation campaign. And another example from Denmark, this was a picture that I have taken coming to DIS last semester, right before the Danish elections. On the wall of Politiken, one of the largest and oldest newspapers in Denmark, should the parliament elections be decided by American algorithms or Russian trolls. So what we know by now is privacy is not only about our pictures, only about our birthday, but it's also about us, who we are, what we do, what we like, what scares us, what influences us to move, what makes us consume and spend money, what makes us save money, how do we react to certain events in the world, and maybe also how do we vote according to these. The argument that Fuchs is presenting in his book is that the platforms that we use to share this much personal, intimate details of our lives and our personality are not equipped to hold this kind of responsibility. The way in which Facebook defines privacy is not the privacy of us, but it is actually the privacy of the company. He says, all of these privacy features, all of these data collection models, all of these data processing and appropriation and commodification processes, they are all part of Facebook's business model. And the business model is based on targeted advertising. So Facebook monitors, commodifies, and uses all of our private data and our behaviors. Whereas the users, us, we don't know what exactly happens with this data. In this week's discussion, I actually want to focus a little bit more on these data policies, because when we are in class together, I usually ask everyone to raise hands if they have ever read a data policy of any of the platforms that they're using. And the result is usually a big no. So this week's discussion will be about reading them and discussing what may be wrong with them, what might be improved about them, and how can we understand them with the critical perspective that Fuchs is offering. Just to prepare you a little bit for that discussion, Fuchs offers a critical discourse analysis of Facebook's private policy. And as a result of this, he offers some very important insights about how to read it critically. There's several things about self-regulation, how responsibility is dealt, the length and the complexity of these policies, the ways in which consent is usually worded unambiguously. We can't really understand what we're really consenting to. The options for opting out. The deal comes as a package deal. The privacy policy is something that you say either yes to and enter the site, or no to and don't enter the site. You really don't have the chance to negotiate. Targeted advertising, obviously being in the center of this. Instant personalization via third-party sites. As you may know, Facebook also tracks your action outside Facebook now. Exploitation of our labor and commodity, our content. The countless hours that we spend producing them, sharing them, liking them, looking at them. The overall intransparency of these policies, and all in all, what Fuchs claims is leading to data appropriation, a commodification of people's content, their labor, their time, and very importantly, personal information about who they are and how they behave on the internet. Which brings me to the very final question: is deleting Facebook the answer? We usually have this discussion inside the classroom too, and usually the response is no, not, and unfortunately not. I'm not really against Facebook. I'm a user of Facebook, and I'm not thinking about deleting in near future. But there are several reasons why we have to think about why it is so difficult, why Facebook is such an integral part of our modern society, and how and why our social relationships depend so much on a digital platform where our data is being collected, stored, and shared with third-party companies for reasons that we may not be able to be aware of. So, all in all, this week's topic, privacy, was mainly about Facebook because of the reading, but you can apply these understandings to more or less all the sites they're using. Snapchat, Instagram, LinkedIn, Zoom has privacy policies, and all these privacy policies need to be reviewed from a critical perspective. In our discussion, we'll be trying to do that together, so I'll be looking forward to hearing from you on that. Take care and stay well. Goodbye.